Hi guys, so today we're going to be looking at creating this melting candle effect using the Houdini software. This will combine some fluid simulation, some basic modelling and also the Pyro Effects. Hope you all enjoy this tutorial. Okay, so you should now have Houdini open, and the first thing that we want to do is set a new project folder. So if you go up to the File button here at the top left and go to New Project, you should get this window come up here. The first thing you want to do is name the project. So I'm just going to call this Melting Wax Candle. And then the project path, you just need to link this to wherever it is on your computer that you want to save this project to. So these are then the subfolders that appear in your main project folder. I'd recommend just leaving all of these as they are, but personally for me, I like to add an additional custom folder, which I call Assets. And all that I put in there is any assets that I've gotten normally from the internet, such as image files that I might be using for textures or models that I've downloaded. Okay, and you'll then want to save this file. And if you go to where you've saved your Houdini project, you should see it appear there. Just go into it, and then I always save mine here. And when you are saving this, make sure you do keep the .hip naming convention. There we go, and just accept that. So the next thing we then want to do is just check the settings. So if you come down here on the bottom right, you'll see this little icon here. If you click it, it should bring up the global animation options. I always have mine set to 25 frames per second. And then the start and the end is just for your frame range, so how long the simulation will be running for. I'm just going to decrease this down to about 150. We can always change this later on, that's no problem. If you just hit apply, you see that should change there. Okay, there we go. So the first thing we then want to look to do is make the candle holder. So to do that, we first need to add a geometry. So if you just click in this nodal box here and hit the tab button on your keyboard, that'll bring up the tab menu. If you type in geo, you'll get the geometry node appear here. If you just click it and drop it here. There we go. So I'm just going to call this candle holder. And then we want to go into this node by double clicking it. And you see automatically there is this file node. We don't need this, so if you just click it and hit delete, that'll get rid of that. And we actually want a tube geometry. There we go. And you'll see that appear here. Okay, so our tube geometry then. The first thing that you're going to want to do is change the primitive type to polygon. We then want this a lot more round, so I'm going to increase my columns to, I say about 30. Might push it up to 35. Yeah, want that nice and round, as this is just going to be a simple dish shape. We then want the ends to have polygons as well. So if you just make sure you tick this end caps box, and then that will fill in the top and also the bottom of your geometry. Now, it's quite tall at the moment, and obviously dishes are a lot smaller, so we want to reduce the height. So I think I'm going to put this to about 0.3. Yeah, I think that is probably the right thickness for our dish. And then the next thing we want to do is add a bevel around this radius here, because we don't want the edges to be that sharp. So if you bring up the tab menu again and type in poly bevel, this will appear at the top. If you click that and add it in, and then you just need to connect the tube to the poly bevel, and then make sure that you have the display flag ticked on the poly bevel, otherwise you'll be making changes and you won't actually see them happening here in the scene viewport. So with this, it's really simple to use this node. You mainly want to be focusing on the offset and the shape. So the offset, this little drag here, you just have to pull it up, and you can already see the effect it is happening on our shape. And it's completely up to you how much bevel you want. I'm only going to have it to, I think about there should be fine. And then the shape, if you have a look, you can scroll through the different shapes that are available to you, and you can pick which one you prefer. I've always found I like the round shape. I think that is a pretty good shape for a dish as well. So I will be having it on round, but you're more than welcome to have a different shape if you'd prefer. And then the divisions, that just affects this, these polygons around the edges here. I'm just going to push mine up to about 4. We now want to add an edit node. So if you drop that down and connect it to the poly bevel node and put the display flag on it, we want to make sure you've got this mouse button here selected and click the middle circle. And then you will have to hit Control K so that it is only the circle that you will now be affecting. And then if you hit the next one down, which is the move, you'll then be able to grab the Z axis and pull that down. You can see then we are creating quite a simple dish shape. You can have it as extreme as you like. I'm only going to have it quite delicate, like that. I think that is pretty good, actually. Maybe a little bit more, like that, I think. This is just going to be so that when the wax melts from the candle, it just has a little dish to collect it in. There we go. So the last thing we really want to be doing with the candle holder right now is adding a basic texture to it. So to do that, you just need to bring up the tab menu, type in material, and select this top one here, just material. And drop that down, connect it to your edit, and put the display flag on. You need to go to the material palette. I'm just going to stick with a basic principle shader. So you just select it and drag and drop it into the actual palette. I'm going to name it. I'm just going to call it candle holder texture. And that's just so I can keep track of them all here, because we will end up with a couple of different shaders. And then if you go to the surface, you're then able to change the base colour. So for me, I'm just going to put it as a sort of turquoisey blue colour. Just something like that. So if you go click on this matte one here, and then where it says matte, go to OBJ, and that'll take us back to this node screen. We want to go back into the candle holder and this material. Make sure you have that selected, and then where this material box is here, click this icon on the far right. And then if you just hit the plus button where it says matte, you'll then see your candle holder texture. Just choose that and hit accept, and there we go. We can see it has appeared in the viewport. So you'll probably be able to see here, we've got this kind of streak of white. That'll be to do with this IOR setting. So if you change that to about 1, that's just to do with the specular, so the reflectivity. So it'll be reflecting the lights. I like to have that on about 1, because then that way it's not too bright, not too reflective at all. So if we go back to the OBJ now, I'm just going to save this because I am quite paranoid about doing that. And then what we want to do now is create a candle to sit in our candle holder. So we need another geometry node. I'm going to call this candle. Going to go into the candle node, delete the file node, and add another tube geometry. So change this again to polygon. I'm going to increase this to about 40 because I want this nice and round. I'm going to close the end caps so that it looks more like a solid shape. And then as you can see, it is completely hidden our candle holder. Obviously this is way too wide, so all we need to do is adjust the radius scale. If you hover your mouse over it and click the middle mouse button, you're able to drag. And I always find this is quite easy then to change the settings. So we want a kind of a pillar candle effect. So I'm thinking that's probably about the right kind of width that we want. I might just increase the height just ever so slightly. I think that'll probably be okay. So if we go back to OBJ, you can then see them both. I'm going to select my candle and hit the move tool up here. And then this Y axis, you just want to grab it and pull it up. And we just want it so that it sits quite nicely on the candle holder. I'm thinking that looks pretty good. I think I might just reduce the height a tiny bit. Yeah, I think I prefer that. There we go. Cool, okay. So if we go back into the candle geometry, we want to add another poly bevel. Connect that to the tube, put the display flag on. And exactly as we did before, just pull along the offset. Now I'm only going to have this quite slight. In fact, I think that is probably already enough. Do it a tiny bit more. Yeah, I think I'll keep it as that. I only want it ever so slight. And then the shape, I am going to put it to round again. And then we want to add a material. So grab the material node, plug that into the poly bevel and hit the display flag. Now in the material palette, conveniently, Houdini does have a wax preset, and that is just what I'm going to simply use today. And I'm just going to keep it called wax as well. So go back to OBJ on this material, exactly as we did before, hit wax, and there we go. We can see that has been applied. So they are the two together. I think that is looking pretty good for what we want. So back in the candle node, we just want to top it off with adding a null node. So if you just connect that to the bottom of the material, and I'm just going to call this out candle. Okay, so this is the basic modeling, and this is all we're going to do right now. We will eventually later on add a wick when we come to add a flame to the candle, but right now we're going to be focusing on getting this wax to melt. So the first thing I'm going to do is, I find this node box can come very crowded very easily with nodes, and it can be a bit of a chaotic mess, and it can sometimes be a bit difficult to find your nodes. So personally, I like to go to this add button and add a network box. Now this again, completely optional, but I just find it helps keep this quite nice and tidy. And all you do here, you can drag your nodes into this box, and it's just a way of grouping them together. So this I'm going to call candle. And if you go to the color palette here and click that, as long as if you've got that selected, you can change the color of it. So I'm just going to put this kind of waxy sort of color on it. And then going to add another network box, and I'm going to call this melting wax controls. And I'll change this to, I'll pop this to a sort of a blue color, as it's going to be a fluid simulation. So now what we want to do is add another geometry, which we're going to be using as our heat source, because the way we're going to get this candle to melt is if you look at your viscous fluid tabs, you'll see there is a melt object, and you're probably thinking it's going to be as simple as selecting that and applying it onto the candle. You can do that. I have tried that before, but what I find with that specific tool is it causes the melting to happen in the center of your shape. So I found a better way to do this, combining the lava from object and the heat within object tools. And it is super quick and easy to use. And like I say, I personally think it is a lot more effective. So what we want to do is add a new geometry. I'm going to drop this into my melting wax controls, and I'm going to call this heat source. If you go into this geometry, we can delete the file node, and I'm now going to add a sphere. There we go. So you want to change this to polygon and push the frequency up to, I normally do it to about 6, because I think this gets a nice amount of deformation and detail on it. And then the uniform scale we're going to want to decrease. You're going to want some of this to overlap the candle, but you don't want it to completely dwarf the candle. So I'm thinking probably about, I'll go about 0.5. Okay, and then what we want to do with this is add a mountain node. And then this just adds some detail, some more deformation to this geometry. So if you connect the sphere to the mountain node, make sure that you tick the display flag, and there you can see the effect that is happening. The only ones here that you really want to focus on changing, if you do want to edit the shape at all, is the height. If you increase it, you can see that's kind of making it a bit more sharp. And if you decrease it, it makes it back into the sphere shape. So I think 1 was pretty good. I quite like that. And the element size, again, you can kind of see the effect it is happening. Yeah, I think that'll do. So we now want to add a, no we don't, we want to add a subdivide node first. So if you plug that into the mountain, and then we want to add a transform node. There we go. So we want this to be placed above the candle, because right now, if we were to leave it right here, it would heat the candle from where it is currently touching the wax. And we want the heat to come and move down the candle. So if you drag this up, I think I'm going to put that about there. And then we want to add some keyframes to get this to move. Now what I'm going to do, because we're also going to add some pyro effects, our very first thing that you'll see is the flame igniting on the candle. So we don't want this to start moving down immediately. So I think I'm going to keep frames 1 to about 75 free so that the pyro effects can work. So from 75 onwards, I'll then have the melting take effect. So to set a keyframe, all you have to do is whichever translation box you want to change, you just need to left click into it, hold down Alt and left click. And then as soon as it's gone green, you know that a keyframe has been set. You can also see across the timeline here that there's a little green marker has appeared. Wherever those green markers are, that is where a keyframe has been set. So we want to drag this along to, I'll go to 150. And then I want to decrease this down so that this heat source is going to move through the candle. And I'll leave it to go to about there. And again, Alt and left click, and then that sets a keyframe. So now, if we play through the simulation, you will see our heat source moves down through the candle. And I think the speed is pretty good of it, so I'll leave it as it is. And then lastly for this, we also want to add a null node. So I'll just attach that to the transform node and name it out heat. There we go. Okay, so what we want to do now is apply the lava from object to our candle. So if you just select that, and then it says down here what it wants you to do, and that's just select the object that you want to turn into lava. We're going to select our candle and hit enter. And then Houdini will just quickly run the script through, and then we'll know it's changed. Here we go, for when this turns into particles. So this auto DOP network, if I just go back to OBJ, you'll see that these two new nodes have been added. They're added from the lava from object. This auto DOP always looks really chaotic. If you just left click anywhere in this space and hit the L button on your keyboard, that just lays this out a lot more neater, and then it doesn't look as horrible as what it originally did. So I'm going to move these up into my melting wax controls network box, just so I'm keeping this all kind of together and neat. And then back up on the viscous fluids tab, I'm then going to select the heat within object. I'm going to click our heat source, hit enter. And then if you see down here, it also says select a fluid that you want this to interact with. So we're going to select our candle and hit enter again. So in here you can see this is the only node we've got in this, which is actually affecting the heat source. All of these other nodes are all to do with our liquid. So what we want to do right now, if I just hit play on this simulation, you'll see that this instantly melts and it's going to go through our dish. There we go. So you can see it's passed through, it's falling down into the unknown, and it melts instantly. Obviously, we don't want that. So the first thing we're going to change is we're going to make this dish into a colliding object. And to do that, you need to come to this collisions tab up at the top and select the static object. Select the disk and hit enter. So if I hit play, you should see, here we go, the dish now catches the melting of the candle. And that's exactly what we want it to do. But we still don't want this candle to melt until the heat source collides with it. So to stop it from melting prematurely, you want to go into the Auto DOP network and then select the flip fluid object. And then we want to decrease the temperature to 0. and you'll see it goes black. And black just basically means it is stone cold. And then we also want to up the viscosity. And viscosity just means that it'll be a lot more rigid. So right now it's quite low, which is why it melted. But we want the viscosity up to, I'm going to put this up to about 10,000. And then that just means it's a lot more rigid and it will maintain its shape. Also on this, we want to look at the particle separation. Now this setting is fantastic. It increases the overall resolution of any fluid simulation you will do. However, if you have it too low at first, it will take ages for your timeline to cache out. So although when we come to caching this out, and we will have this a lot lower, right now I'm only going to put it to about 0.05, so then that way it won't take as long for this to cache out, so you should then be able to still see the changes you are making fairly quickly. And you've also probably noticed that as soon as I've changed that, we've got a lot more particles here. The lower this goes, the more densely packed you will have particles. But we want this pretty low because as soon as this is lower, it will maintain the candle shape. If you want to see what this will look like, if you go into the candle fluid, you'll see this surface cache. If you just put the display flag on it, you'll then see this is what we will be getting once we cache it out. Now it still looks a bit thick and blobby. As I've just been saying, this is to do with the particle separation. If I quickly show you, if I put this right down to 0.01, we should see that this will look a lot more like the original candle geometry that we did just have. There we go. So we will end up with something a lot more similar to that, but we will just keep this at 0.05 just whilst we're playing about with the settings so that we can actually see the settings changing with us. You also want to put this back onto your DOP import here, and that just means that you're able to see the particles. If you keep it on the surface cache, again, this will cause this to seriously slow down. So now what I'm going to do, I'm just going to hit play and run this through. There we go, so you can really see, if I pause and just go back to that frame, you can really see the left edge here is starting to sink down. And this is exactly what we want to happen. But what I am just going to do, I am going to increase my frame range. I'll put this to 200 frames. Just then that way we get more of the wax melting. So now what we now need to do is cache this out. And then caching out is really, really simple. If you just go into your candle fluid and then this surface cache, this is all you need. But first, before we cache out, we're just going to look back at this. I'm going to decrease my particle separation to 0.01 because I really want this to be quite nice high res. There we go. So if we then look at the droplet scale, I'm just going to decrease it a little bit. I'm going to pop that to 0.8. So I'm thinking that looks pretty good. If you tick the surface cache, you can kind of see, I think that looks a lot more like the geometry we originally had. So to cache out then, all you want to be doing is going to this surface cache node. This is our frame range, so 1 to 200, so that is correct. The valid frame range, you want to make sure that it is on this save frame range. And then you want to come up to this geometry file. Make sure you copy the .sf and all of that at the end. This is for fluid simulation. So when we cache that, we need to copy this back into our naming convention. The .sos, as I call it, I think it's actually $OS. That actually is more for the Pyro Effects. So when we come to cache out our Pyro, we will copy this whole naming convention. But for Fluid Sim, you only need the $F. So copy that, and then when we go to this icon on the right, it'll then ask you where it is that you want to save this to. So if we go to our Houdini project, where we did initially save this project to, and then I always save it to the geo file. And I'm just going to call this melting wax sim. And I'm going to Control V to copy in that end of the naming convention. And you always need to do that for the cache to work successfully. So if you do that, paste that, hit accept, And then all you then need to do is I'll just quickly save, because it can take a bit of computer memory to cache out and I don't want it to crash halfway through. So make sure you save and then just hit save to disk. So you will get this come up, and this just tells you what frame it's on, how long it's got and what it's doing. This can take a little while. Don't worry about that. It will depend on your computer power and all things like that, but just let it run. I normally go grab a coffee to get me through this bit, but yeah, we'll wait. I'm going to pause the video and I'll be back once this is done. Hey guys, so I am back from the caching and I do have a confession to make. I have cheated slightly. In true Blue Peter style, I decided to use a cache that I have done before because this one was taking ever so long. But once that's gone for you, all you then need to do to bring the cache back into the scene is, I'm going to put a new node in here, so I'm just going to make this a bit bigger. So we want a geometry node. So if you bring that in, drop that there. I'm going to call this candle cache. And then if you go into this node, delete that file. And then we want the DOP_I/O node. So if you drop that in, and then this button here where it says geometry file, if you go to this icon, we want to go to our home folder. If you go to wherever it was that you've saved your Houdini project, into the geo where you've written the cache out, and this is my previous cache. So if I accept that, I bring that in. You then need to hit load from disk. Oh, and here it is. Apparently it's a lot bigger than my current scene, but that's fine. I can easily scale that down. But you should then be able to see your cache appear, and yours should be the actual size of the original candle. Mine, I've clearly made it a lot bigger in my previous scene. So I'm just gonna untick those for a moment. I'm just gonna scale this down to size. Like I say, you shouldn't have to do this. Cool, okay, so here is my cached out candle. So we take a look at what it looks like when we play it through. Yeah, there we go. So that's actually looking pretty cool for this. One thing I will just note, from when I started off with the heating, as you can see, it really doesn't start taking effect until quite late on into our simulation. So probably what I would do is I'd actually increase my frame range, just so we get some more of this, because I quite like this. As this is just a tutorial for me, I'm just going to keep it as this. But like I said, I would kind of recommend for you guys maybe making this a little bit longer so you get more of this effect. But for this will do nicely. Okay, so right now you're probably looking at that and thinking, oh, it's grey. That's fine, we can now easily add on a texture. So if we go back into our candle cache, or actually I'll tell you what I will just do firstly. With the heat source, because that will still be moving in the background. If you just select them all, you can just kind of drag that to select, and then you want, if you just hit B, that should, yeah, if you just hit the B on your keyboard, basically all that does is it means it's bypassing this simulation. So whereas I did say earlier, even if you do turn off the display flag, the heat source is still having an effect. So it won't actually be doing anything because this is cached out now. It would still be moving, which would just kind of ultimately slow down your scene because you know, it has stuff happening in the background. So if you just bypass that, that means it completely skips that step, but we're not deleting it. And then that way, if we do want to change something, we can easily just, if you select it all again, hit B again, it kind of unbypasses it, and then we can always come back and change stuff. So that's just a kind of a way to sort of stop stuff from happening in the background without just outrightly deleting it. And the same you can do for this, if it will allow me to select it all. There we go, and if you hit B, then that bypasses all of the candle fluid. The auto DOP we are actually going to need again for our Pyro effect, but just for now, I am gonna bypass that. That will be fine. And I am just going to save again. Okay, so for our candle cache then, to add a material, super easy. Just add the material node. It's exactly what we did. We don't need to do anything more fancy than this. And hit the wax again and hit accept, and there we go. And even when it starts doing its cool stuff, it still has this wax material on it. So if I go into my render view, you should be able to see what it looks like. It is only going to have default lighting at the moment, because obviously we haven't got any actual lights that we personally added in. So the lighting might not look the best, but you'll get the idea of what it's going to look like with all of its textures on. So if you want to speed up any particular part of this kind of rendering, if you just hold down the left mouse button and kind of drag, it sort of speeds it up a little bit. But there we go, we're kind of getting the idea of the colours and what it's going to look like. And we can also see, obviously, all of the wax texture is on the melting candle. So that's looking pretty good. Okay, so now what we want to do is add our pyro effect. So to do that, we want to add a wick for the fire to sit on. So we're going to need another geometry node. I'm going to call this wick. Delete the file, and you've probably already guessed it, we're wanting another tube geometry. There we go. So I want this as a polygon again. Close the end caps. We want this nice and round, so I'll pop it to about 35. Then obviously we want this a lot smaller, because this is going to be sat on the candle. So I'm going to make it really thin, and we're going to reduce the height by quite a lot as well. So we're probably still going to want to play around with these settings, but I'm just going to position it first. So if I just come out, grab the move tool, get the y-axis, pull it up, we can see it's sat there. And then if you go back into this, to be able to better see it in with the candle and the dish, if you come up to this button up here, this icon, it says Ghost Other Objects. So what that means is currently we're at the node that we're in, we're able to see that geometry nice and clearly. And any other objects, so our candle and our candle holder, are kind of ghosted, so you can sort of see them, but they're really transparent. So if you've got 3 options in total. So this ghost one that we're on currently, you can hide it, so you only see the geometry you are working on, or you can show them all, and then that way you can see them clear as day. I'm just going to have it on the show at the moment, just so I can kind of really optimize this to the height and width of our actual candle. So I'm going to decrease this down a lot more. In fact, actually, I think that looks pretty good. We want it quite small. In fact, yeah. No, that's too big. I'll keep that as 0.1. Okay. And then we want this to obviously sit on top of our candle. So if we just push it down like that, there we go. And then we want a material on it. So into this material palette, we no longer need this lava material, so you can just delete that just to keep this kind of nice and tidy. And then I'm going to add a principal shader, drag it and drop it in. I'm going to call it wick texture. And I'm just going to make it black. So if you come back to the OBJ and apply the wick texture, and there we go. So it's quite basic, but I think it looks like a candle. You know what it's supposed to be. Now we want to add the pyro effect. So first thing, I'm going to add a new network box, and I'm just going to call this flame. There we go. And I'm going to turn this, I'm going to pop that red. Cool. Okay. So to add to add any pyro effect, you need to be quite obviously on this pyro effect tab. There is one here called candle. I have tried this before, and personally I don't really like it. I much rather use either the flame or the smokeless flame, just because I think you've got better control over the actual flame. And this one, it just it seems to go ever so tall, I always find. You probably can edit it, but I personally find the flame or the smokeless flame a lot easier. So we want the flame to sit actually on the wick. If you apply the flame directly to the wick geometry as it currently stands, it completely engulfs this whole wick geometry. So we don't want to put it directly on it. Instead, you're going to want to select the wick. You want to copy it, so just Control C and then Control V to paste it back on. I'm going to pop this in the flame network box. I'm going to change this to flame emitter. So right now, if I hide the display flag on that, you can see looks like it's still there. It's just a duplication of that model. So I'm going to go into this geometry. I'm going to ghost the others so we can clearly see which is our flame emitter one. What we actually want to do is, you don't need the material on, you can just delete that. And we actually want to half the height. You want the radius to be the same, but half the height, like that. And then we want to add a transform node. Apply that. And we just want to bring that up to the very top of the flame. There we go. Okay. So you can kind of see it just through it, but this geometry is going to be hidden by the fire, so don't worry about that. You won't actually see that. But all we've done, so that is just half of the wick. So I would now advise to turn off the display flag for the wick, because when you come to apply the flame, you do need to select that. And if you've got the wick on, it's kind of difficult to know if you've selected the actual flame emitter or the wick itself. So I just like to turn the display flag off real quick. And then we're going to go with the flame one, I think. So if you click that, select our flame emitter and hit enter. And then it will just run its thing through. Here we go. So we just want to unbypass them so that our flame emitter will work. And you can see these new nodes have appeared in our auto DOP network, and all of this is for our little flame. If you back out here, you can see just the one node has been created, this Pyro import. And I'm just going to move our auto DOP over to our flame one, just so we know this is now controlling the flame rather than the melting wax controls. So our flame emitter, you can see these nodes have been added. We don't really need to do a lot with these at all. You can kind of leave these all as the default ones. I think there is, no, we want all of them to stay the same. The main ones we're going to be using, this Pyro import, we're going to cache this flame out. We will be using the Pyro import nodes for that. And until then, we're mainly going to be in this auto DOP network. So right now, if I just hit play, you'll see that the flame is going to be ignited. And it's probably going to go really tall, and it's not going to really look like a candle flame. But we'll just run it through and see what it does. One thing I probably should have done as well, actually, is if you just turn the display flag back onto the wick, you can then actually see that it looks like it is on the wick itself, which is exactly what we want it to do. And it has completely engulfed this flame emitter, so you can no longer see that at all. So at this point, the wax is probably going to start to melt. Just ignore that. Obviously this isn't going to move in relation to it, but we're going to sort that out later. Right now we just want to deal with this fire flame. So yeah, we're getting the idea of how that looks, so I'll just pause it there. So right now, I mean, if you think of what a candle flame looks like, and I would always recommend to kind of go on Google Images and just type in candle flame, and you will get the idea of exactly what it looks like. And that is the kind of style that obviously we would be aiming for. And this is not that. So if we go back to the beginning of our simulation and go into the Auto DOP network, you can then see these this Pyro box here. The Pyro solver, this is always a really big important one, and the source fuel. Probably won't need to use this one that much. No, that one you can just kind of ignore. But the Pyro solver is the main one that we are going to be using. So again, these are our settings, our parameters. If you're ever unsure what they're going to do, if you just hover your mouse over and it kind of gives you a bit of a description. But I do think the Pyro effect ones are a lot more easy to understand compared with the fluid simulation. So this is what we've got so far. The first thing I'm looking at is my flame height. Obviously, I don't want it to go off and up the way it was. I want it to be a lot smaller because obviously if you think of an actual candle, the flames are never that big. So I'm going to reduce this right down to 2. The gas released, if you hover over it, you can see it says a scale factor controlling how much gas is injected into locations where fuel is burnt. This causes burning areas to blow outwards. That sentence is the one we want to really focus on. Obviously, we don't want the fire to be blown outwards. That's more like if you were trying to make an explosion, which would look pretty cool, but obviously not realistic for a candle. So I'm going to decrease this to about 8 for now, and we can always change these later on. The rest I'm just going to leave the same for now because I think they'll be okay. And if we go back to our simulation, we also want to look at this buoyancy lift. So the buoyancy lift is just a setting that controls how much the fire is kind of lifted upward. You can change the direction. So this buoyancy direction here right now, it's got 1 in our y-axis, and if you look down here you can see this really helpful little chart saying which direction's which. So obviously we can see by this the green y-axis is pointed upward. If you wanted for some reason the fire to blow outwards, you can change either the x or the z axis and get it to go any which direction you really kind of want. But obviously we do want the flame to go upwards, but probably not as much as it is doing. I'm going to decrease down to 0.08. So if I just go back to the OBJ level, I'm going to play through my simulation again. And at this stage, this is one of those where it's kind of you make a change, you hit play, you have to wait for it to cache out. Luckily though, this is actually going pretty quickly. So I think already we can see that this is a lot smaller than what it just was. Probably still want it a little bit smaller. I think that's already starting to look a bit better. Okay, so I'm going to pause it there. I'm going to go back into my Auto DOP. Look back at the buoyancy lift. I'm going to change this down to 0.06. The cooling rate. So how fast the temperature field cools to 0, value of 0.9 will decrease the temperature of hot gas by 90%. So the higher this is, the more it's going to cool down. I might pop this up to 0.9, just see how the effect is. Can always change it back if needs be. I'm going to go back into the combustion. I'm going to change this to 1.5. Temperature output, that will be fine. The burn rate, I think that will be okay. Gas release, I'm going to decrease that to 6. Just have a look at how this looks. Yeah, already I can see I can like that a lot more. The flame is a lot smaller than what it was. Okay, it is still growing quite a lot, and that is all to do with the amount of gas that is going into it. So what causes the flame to grow? It's gas and temperature. And no, the fuel's not really doing anything. So it is mainly this temperature and the gas. So these are going to be what we're kind of looking at for the moment. Gonna up that a little bit more. Pop that to 1. And the gas release, I'll leave that there. I don't want to turn that down too much. But the burn rate, can actually decrease that to 0.8. And fuel inefficiency. So this one, as you can read, it controls how much of the burn fuel was actually not burnt but kept. So 0 means all burn fuel is removed from the fuel field. 1 means no fuel was removed. So what that means is if it's a low kind of value, the fuel will get used up and it won't be replaced. If you have it higher, the fuel kind of remains, meaning the flame kind of never dies down. And obviously we do want it to die down, so I'm going to decrease that to 0.1. And here we go. Yes, I think that's looking a lot more realistic. You can see it's definitely dying down a lot more. It's a lot smaller than what we had. And if you look at it in relation to the actual candle, I do think that's probably a good height for the actual flame. You can also kind of see it's not really getting much bigger than that. The occasional kind of lick of a flame, but otherwise that is the basic height that it is staying throughout the whole simulation. So I think I'm pretty happy with the look of that. Yeah, I think I'm pretty happy with that. So what we then want to look at is this shape and this shredding factor. So this really, if you look here, you can kind of see I've got one big kind of flame going up and lots of little ones. If I tweak this, it kind of just optimizes this a lot more. So I'm going to push this up to, if I grab that other 0, I'm going to put that to 1. Or 0.001, I should say. Just run it through and see what it looks like. But the more you play about with kind of that, the more realistic it will look. Yeah, so I think I quite like that kind of shape, because I think a typical candle doesn't really have many kind of flames going off of it. It's just almost like a triangular shape. You just have kind of one big flame. So I wouldn't want too many licks, but I think 1 or 2 just makes it look a bit nice, a bit more interesting, which is kind of what we want. But that I am quite happy with. So if I just, yeah, I think that's looking pretty good. So if we now go to the material palette, and I would recommend staying in the render view to sort this one out. First thing I'm just going to very quickly do is go into my wick texture and decrease this IOR value to 1. So I can kind of see there had a lot of white kind of reflection on it, and I don't really want that. So I'm just going to do that real quick and then go back to the flames. So these are the sorts of images that we're getting. So you can see, like I said earlier, it's got that kind of triangular shape. It's not that many licks at all. And it's very white. That's the first thing I kind of take from this. It is very, very white. So we kind of want to make ours quite nice and white and bright as well. And this is really mainly controlled by this ramp here. So if you start to kind of decrease these values, get a lot more white in there, you should see very quickly that it starts to register that right here. So I think I might even go as far as deleting that one for now. Just having this yellow one. Really getting this to start looking quite white. If we look around the edges, you can see kind of that sort of typical red orangey kind of look from a flame. So I'm going to change this to be a lot more orange rather than that kind of gross yellow it was. I'm also going to add in a little bit of red, like that. We'll pull these right to the edges because we only want them in quite slightly. I'm going to add yellow as well, make it bit more of that orangey kind of yellow. Sort of like that. And we really want to pull this white kind of up. Really want that flame to be quite nice and white. And then this is all about, again, kind of playing with these settings, seeing what kind of effect that you can achieve. So I'm starting to think that's kind of looking a bit like what I want. I might put a very sort of slight yellowy kind of tinge to it. Just for aesthetic purposes, really. There we go. Might look at maybe adding a slight light blue tinge to the bottom. If we go back on our colours, you can kind of see quite a lot of these has this kind of bluey kind of colour at the bottom, like that. So I'm just going to see if I can kind of recreate that a bit. Yeah, so you can kind of see you've got the blue around the edges, and then you've got this quite white sort of flame with the red around it. And then I would always say to check another frame as well, because sometimes that one frame you might have optimized the colors and it looks pretty good, but if you then go to another frame, it's like it might be overpoweringly blue, something like that. So I'll just check a couple, see what it looks like when it first initially ignites. So that's pretty cool. We want it to kind of have that nice sort of red color. You see then as it's heating up, it's going to the white. Got the little bit of blue there, which is kind of what we want. And there we go. So I'm thinking that works for what I'm trying to achieve. Obviously, play around with these colors, get whatever effect you want. You might want a lot more of a kind of reddish, orangey, yellow kind of colored flame. In which case, go for that. That will look just as awesome. But just for this, I'm going to stick with kind of this sort of shading here. And then the only other thing you might want to look at doing is the density scale for the smoke. I'm probably going to turn right down. You should see these kind of grainy, sort of grey bits you could see in the background. That just gets rid of them. Because I've always found if you want to add smoke, you're probably best just to add it separately, rather than kind of going off of the flames, because it doesn't always look the best. Unless you're going for an explosion effect, then that can look pretty good. But, and then the intensity scale. So if you push this up a bit more, might put it to about 4. Just kind of makes it all look a little bit brighter. But I quite like that. So that is what I'm going to go for the colouring of my candle. I'm going to turn the candle cache and the candle holder back on, just so we can kind of see it with it all on. Just back out so we can see it all together. And that way we should get an idea. I'm just going to quickly save as well, because my laptop's sounding like it could crash Houdini at any moment. There we go. So I think that looks pretty good. I'm just going to now go back into the auto DOP, go to the Pyro node, and decrease this division size down to 0.001, because I do want this to look pretty good. So I'll have it like that. And now what we want to do is cache this out. Cool. So I'm going to save that. And then we want to go into the Pyro import node. And you've got 2 nodes in here. You've got this import Pyro fields and this Pyro visualization. So the visualization is currently got the display flag on, and that's just because it is this that you are visualizing. We want to focus though on this import Pyro fields. So as you can see, as earlier when we was caching out the fluid sim, it's got this geometry file. This time though, you want to get the whole end of the naming convention, so this $OS as well. If you control and copy that, and then I'm going to save it in the same place as my other cache, this wax melting, and I'm just going to call this flame sim. Copy it all, or paste all of that in there, except that. And then exactly as we did before, you then just have to go to this save to file. Make sure obviously this is on save frame range and it's 1 to 200, which it is. And then just save to disk. Okay, so you should now have cached out your flame simulation. I have to admit I'm having another Blue Peter moment where I'm going to use my original one. So the first thing that you're going to want to do, in the Pyro import node, you want to bypass these nodes. And it really is important that you do bypass these. Don't just outrightly delete them, because if you do want to change anything, you'll kind of screw yourself over there. So I would recommend just bypassing them, and then that way this keeps this kind of optimized and going as quickly as it can, so there's not a load of background stuff happening as well. So once you've done that, we need another geometry node. So drop that into the flame network box, and I'm just going to call this flame cache. And then for the first time probably ever, we're not just going to delete this file node, because this file node is actually capable of reading that $OS filing convention that we used. So all you've got to do is go find where it is that you saved your sim, your cached out sim. So for me, it was in this geo in my melting wax candle project file. So you just bring it in, hit accept. You should be able to see it. Now yours will go straight onto your candle and you'll be all happy and great. Me on the other hand, because I've used it from a different scene, if you remember with my candle, the candle was huge, meaning the flame is also huge. Annoying for me, but it's it was better than just kind of letting my poor laptop try and cache it all out again. But for you, yours should already be there. So what I now have to really quickly do is just add a transform node in, and I'm just going to very quickly resize mine so it is the size that we want it, and just doing that should be enough to put it where I want it to go. Yep. So now if we play it through, you're probably looking at this thinking, well, the flame's not there. It actually is, it's just, it's not got its material on. So if you zoom in, you can kind of see this wispy sort of smoke, kind of there. So it is difficult to see, but it is actually there. So what we need to do is drag on the material. So that is as simple as going material palette, the flames one that we use, you just drag and drop it onto your sim. And if we go to the render view, you should then be able to see the flame with the texture on it. Okay, so mine didn't go on. This does sometimes happen. Yeah, so I've dragged and dropped it and nothing's happened. It might work for you. If it doesn't, if you just click on your flame cache and on this render tab, so mine's currently blank. Hopefully you've got your material palette and it'll have flames or whatever texture is that you've got on there. Yours will be there. I just have to click on this, hit the flames, hit accept, and then my flame texture should hopefully be added on. There it is. Yeah, so sometimes dragging and dropping most of the time does work. In a way, I'm almost pleased that didn't work, so I could just quickly show you that other way. But it is pretty simple getting it on. The only small glitch is that because it is a cache, you still can't actually see it in the viewport. Highly frustrating, but you kind of have to deal with it. It's not much we can do about it. You might have a little bit more smoke that you can see. Mine is actually pretty see-through, but we do know from the render view that it is there. So now we're pretty much nearing the end of this now. We've got our flame igniting. We've obviously cashed out with our wax actually melting. So now all we've got to do is get this to move in time with that. And the most simplest and easiest way that you can do it is the ever faithful keyframe method way. So what I'm going to do, I first want to make the wick and the flame cache kind of one geometry. So I'm going to come into my wick geometry. I'm going to just drag and select both of them and Control C to copy my nodes. I'm going to go back to OBJ into my flame cache and I'm just going to paste them here like that. Okay, so mine's gone down there, so what I just have to do, get my transform node. I think that's probably my fault from earlier. I think I said earlier to move it up here. Probably would have been, in fact, definitely would have been better just to use a transform node because then that would have been there. You could have copied them all over and it would already be in the right place. As right now, all we've got to do is add the transform node here. I've just gone here, copied that figure there so that I can paste this here. And then that moves it into the exact same spot that that was and we're all good again. So you can delete that wick now. We don't need that one. We've now got it as part of the flame cache. So all we've got to do is add a merge node. There we go. Just going to drag that down a bit and connect both of the flame and the wick into the merge node and just put the display flag on that. And then they're merged together and you can, if I back up now, if I skip a little bit, you could barely see the flame, but it is there. And you can also see the wick. So they're now moving together. And all we're going to do is set some keyframes. So I'm going to skip along a little bit, right up until when the wax first starts to melt. I think it's slowly starting to go there actually, yeah. So we just want the last kind of frame where it's still nice and thick and that this is in the right place in the centre of it. So I'm thinking that is probably, yeah, so you can see that starts to go down there. So on about 136 then, frame 136 it is for me. Yours will probably be a little bit different, but I'm just going to set a keyframe here and I'm going to come back into this node and I'll do it properly, do a transform node. So transform node here, we're going to set the keyframe. So we only want it on the y-axis of the translate, so I only focus it on this box. If I was also going to be keyframing the rotation and scale, I'd be putting keyframes on all these boxes, but we're only focused on the y-axis. You just want to hold down Alt and left click in there, and it turns green when you set the keyframe. So I'm also just going to show all the objects rather than have them ghosted so I can really clearly see this. We're going to move it along, so I'll go to 150, so we can see that has actually moved down a tiny bit. So I'm going to drag that, not that much. Just going to go minus 0.01, just only needs to be a tiny bit. We just want it to still stay sitting on there. And then make sure you set your keyframe. So if we play that through, see that's kind of sinking down as the wax is going, which is exactly what we want. If I skip to 175, big difference now. So you just have to drag it. I wonder if you can, no, we'll just stick with the dragging. You just want it to be resting on the bottom. So that is a little bit too high. I think I might put it back to 0.8. I think that is sitting quite nicely. Maybe a little bit more. Yeah. Oh, and set the keyframe. If you haven't set the keyframe and you moved like how I was literally just about to, you will actually lose that. So always do make sure you do set the keyframe before moving again. So I'm just going to play it through and make sure it stays in time, sort of at the same kind of speed, which it is. That looks pretty good. Sometimes it can, like I think you can see there, it does go a little bit more. So if you did want it to remain kind of more at the same speed, you can play about and adjust it, but I think that's only minor, so I'm quite happy to kind of leave it like that, I think. So let's go to then frame 200. So again, that's another really significant drop. So I'm just going to drag. Went a bit too happy there. Oop. Yeah, that's pretty good. And set the keyframe. And I think that should pretty much be it now. So if I just zoom out, and I'll just run that through so we can see if that kind of sticks with the wax. So yeah, you can see as the wax starts to go down, so does our wick and flame. And it is honestly as simple as that. And I think it looks effective, but as you can tell, super easy to set up. And we're done. Okay, so I'm going to save. And then really you could render this out exactly as it is. All I'm going to do, and this is just for aesthetic purposes, I'm just going to add another geometry node in. I'm going to create almost like a little table effect. And I will just call this table. I'm going to call this, in fact, I'm going to get grid. Pop that in. Change the columns to 2 by 2. Get a transform node. Just go minus a little bit, so there we go, just so that is, it's still under it actually a bit. Yeah, so that should do fine. That is now just sitting on it. And all I'm going to do with this is add a material. Go to my material palette. I'm going to go up to the principal shader. Call this, I'll just put wooden table. And I'm actually going to go to the textures and I'm going to tick the use texture. And then this is where I said earlier how I like to have that assets box. This is for this reason exactly. So I downloaded earlier just a simple wood texture, put that in my assets, and applied that there. And then you just select it. And there we go. So you can just see it just kind of looks a bit brown. But if we go into the render view, there we go. So now it just looks like a candle is sat on a wooden table. Quite nice and simple. Okay. So now all that's left now really to do is add lighting and a camera. So I'm going to first make another network box. I'm just going to call this lights and cameras. I'll leave that grey, that'll be fine. And yeah, so now we want to make a camera. So up here, as you can see, it says currently no cam. If you click that, you can add a new camera right there. And then you can kind of see, this is your kind of camera view here. I'm just going to drag that into my network box. As soon as you move, you come out of the camera view. You can see the cameras there, you come out of the camera view. To go back into it, you just have to click where it says no cam and go to cam 1 and you're looking through it again. Now if you don't like this position, if you hit this little padlock button, if you click it, and now if you move, you stay in the camera view and you can position the camera wherever you like. And once you toggle that off, if I zoom back out, you can then go back into it and the camera is now in your new position. So I think I'm going to zoom mine in a little bit more. I'm going to kind of have it probably about there. Maybe more like that. Yeah, I think I'll have mine like that. So if I toggle off the padlock, it's going to hit save. And then I'm just going to actually check that this is the side that we get the nice kind of melting on, which yeah, it is. I like that. I'll have it in that view, because I think that's definitely the more interesting side for me. So I want it looking at that side, trickling down there. You can kind of see the fire's going to actually disappear from about there. But we know it's all nicely in time. I might just pull that up a little bit more. It would help if I toggled the padlock on, pull that a little bit more, just so I've definitely got all of the flame in. So, yeah, got to pop it like that. There we go. And then for lights, if you go up to our effects kind of tabs here, you've got this lights and cameras. You can actually add a new camera there, but I like to just do it there for the ease of it all. And then it's really up to you what light that you want to use. Just for quick basic lighting, I prefer to use a skylight, and you always get 2 nodes for that. So if you click them, it might take a minute for them to load, but there they are, and then here they are. So you've got sunlight and a skylight, and I like to just use this. It's quick and it's simple, and you know it's got all of the lights that you're going to want. Okay, so with this then, you can kind of get an idea of the lights in just the scene view of how it's going to be. I want more light kind of around this side really, where more of the action's kind of going. And if you do want to move the light, it's honestly not the easiest of things, but once you get the hang of it, you know, you can kind of get it pretty good. But it's just about rotating it all here. You can kind of see it moving. It's pretty good. It's pretty accurate. And there we go. And it's just about repositioning the light. That was probably the wrong way to go, I think. There we go. I am going to also decrease the light intensity. Definitely don't want it that bright. And I'm also going to just turn the grid off. So in my render view, right, so first thing I'm thinking is the table looks awful, and I know exactly why that is. If you go in material palette, it is this IOR again. Yeah, so that's set to 1.5. I put it to 1.0, and you should see pretty instantly, yeah, here we go. The table's already looking a lot more brown, like what you would expect it to. But here we kind of go. I think I'm also actually just going to change my candle holder slightly darker kind of blue. It's awfully bright. Yeah, I think that's a bit better. Have that there. I actually think that lighting's looking pretty good. You can see there's some shadow going on there, which is what we would want to see. Okay, so this is pretty much ready to go for the render then. So I'll just play it through a final time. I've just upped, I think this does look a bit different. All I've done is just upped the metallic quality, the parameter on my material, just because I think it does make it look a bit more interesting. But I think here we go, we can start to see that's going. I think the quality of the candle definitely could be better, but as this is just a tutorial, it's only supposed to be a quick one. But yeah, you get the idea. And obviously just optimizing through our controls. It's not hard to get a better sort of quality than this, but just with what we've done, I think this is pretty good. You know, I quite like this sort of style. But then that is it. So yeah, I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial, and I hope it does come in handy for you all.